Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Deanna Minich. Welcome back to another one of our Thought Leader Conversation series as part of the American Nutrition Association. We have been talking about many different facets into this COVID-19 situation, and today we have Dr. Jeffrey Bland, who's going to shed some light into what can personalized lifestyle medicine do within this era of this pandemic, this new world that we're living in. And for those of you who do not know who Dr. Bland is, I can't imagine, but let me just give a quick thumbnail on who he is. He's an internationally recognized leader in the nutritional medicine field for over 35 years. And one of the things that I know about him personally from working with him for some time is that he has the ability to take complex concepts and to synthesize them in such a way that they are digestible, they're understandable, and very inspirational. I think one of the things about Dr. Bland, in addition to him being the father of functional medicine, the founder of the Personalized Lifestyle Medicine Institute, and being an author and researcher, is his keen ability to inspire people with all the information that's out there. So hello, Dr. Bland, glad to have you here this afternoon.
Well, Dr. Minich, thank you. What a treat to be with you on this important topic that's got obviously everybody's attention reason.
It certainly does. And in fact, as we progress here, we're middle of April and information is changing day by day. And I'm just wondering, you're on the heels of a very important seminar and dissemination of information even yesterday, and you're on the pulse of all of this real time. One of the things I go to you for is to understand what is new, what is emerging, what's the sense of larger vision. And I think that many of us are getting grounded into these concepts of what does it mean to have a healthy, functioning immune system? What can we be doing? Based on your conversations and the types of things that you've been doing lately, what do you see as blind spots for people? What do you see as emerging, as interesting, as novel, and things that perhaps not everybody might be aware of, but need to be aware of during this very crucial time?
Well, thank you. I had a raw yesterday with something that someone said, an idea is like a virus in itself, that if it's a great idea, it gets into your nervous system and it replicates itself. If it's a really good idea, it helps other people understand. A statement was made in the conversation I had in which they referred to the COVID-19 virus, this RNA virus, as malware. That if you think about it, it's really a genetic piece of information that's coded together with code to kind of protect it, and it's itself up as a delivery system to be a piece of malware that gets into genetic information, causes it to do work for it, to make more virus particles. But it's more than a malware that just influences biology. That's kind of simple understanding. As we've learned, it's all that changes society. It changes economics, it's cultural context, it changes quality of life. I mean, it has a huge effect. So if you want to talk about malware in the of what that word would mean, COVID-19 is such an example. So then you start to say, how do you get rid of malware? We have our prevent getting in there. And so if you use this analogy, it raises some very possibilities, I think, examine COVID-19. So the first place you would about it, if you know an analogy, is, okay, so the virus of malware RNA to body in some interact or through our mouth, has to then get into the hardware of our body in order to do that. It has to penetrate somehow, be taken up. We now know that these that virus that we've all 1,000 times of the electron micrograph of the COVID, we know that it stick and it has to then release its contents into the cell. And so the stickiness of malware DNA or RNA then becomes the first stage of defense. And so how do you do that? Well, these are so-called receptor sites. So those spicules, those spikes, and they're called spike proteins, have to stick onto the targets, the surface of a cell. And it's been found those principal targets is the angiotensin converting enzyme receptor 2 and ACE2. And that in itself is kind of interesting if you think about it, because you say, well, hold it, angiotensin doesn't have to do with the control of blood pressure. I mean, how are we talking about something that's related to viruses? I thought angiotensin was part of the whole program of vascular reactivity and to cardiovascular function. Well, yes, but we know that we're a web. And so the construct that you have malware, it's really not just a virus, it's an influence on our web of function, of which there is interconnectedness among many, many different parts. So you want to go upstream and you want to stop it from even getting a chance to get into the web. So how do you do that? You try to block the receptor site. And so people are searching for drugs that would occupy the receptor site and be preferential to prevent the spike proteins to bind with the surface of our mucosal cells. Well, when you then examine that for a moment, you find out that, lo and behold, people have been studying these coronaviruses for some time because they're the common cold viruses and other forms of flu. And they've recognized that when you start studying the connection between the spike proteins and these coronaviruses with these ACE2 receptors, that there are actually natural products that we've eaten historically in our diets, phytochemicals, that actually influence the binding of these spike proteins to our cells and can block the penetration of this malware into the cell. So you say, well, what are those? And I think it's, the more we look, the more we find it's a portfolio of different phytochemicals. It's not just one. There appears to be a whole family of them, certainly in the flavonoid family, bioflavonoids that are important, but there are others that are outside the flavonoid family, like the resveratrol, which is not really a flavonoid that has been found, or things like ECGC, epigallocatechin gallate from green tea. That's not really a flavonoid as such, but these are all compounds that are found in various foods that are now known to modulate the receptivity of this spike protein to receptors that could then cause their penetration to occur. So now, is that a drug, or is it a food, or is it an immune modulator, or is it a resistance factor, or is it a resilience factor? I mean, it could be one or all of the above. And what we do know, therefore, is that eating complexity that contains a lot of these phytochemicals in this portfolio makes a difference in how our body receives this foreign malware that might attach and penetrate. So that would be number one, which ties to what you've been talking about for years, eating color of the rainbow, diversity, because these compounds are members of the families that impart color, flavor, and texture to our plant foods. So let me stop there. Is that a good start?
It's a wonderful start, absolutely. And I really like your idea of bringing in a metaphor, because during this time, nutritionists can work with clients, give them story, give them metaphor to relate to. So you're talking about the virus as malware and how it attaches. And I feel like there's been so much visibility and focus on this virus, how it looks, how it works. And I'm wondering if we can also focus on the immune system, the symbology of the immune system. And one of the metaphors that I hearken back to, and I think you'll remember this, Dr. Bland, because it really speaks to our beloved colleague, Dr. Jack Kornberg. One of his metaphors with patients was talking about the road of life and how we move on the road of life and we might get a little pothole in which we develop symptoms, or we have something that happens to us, and maybe we continue on driving through that path of life in such a way that we don't actually fix the pothole. We continue. And we continue to drive over that road of life, and eventually it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And this really speaks to personalized lifestyle medicine, because everybody has different potholes. We have different roads of life. And so how do we get in? You just mentioned a number of great things, whether it's eating the rainbow, focusing on flavonoids. There can be so many things that create those potholes, so to speak. right? Traumas, epigenetics, things from childhood, things from birth. And so I'm curious, when you talk about personalized lifestyle medicine, how do we help nutritionists to navigate that road of life with their clients? How do they actually start to look at that and to work with their clients in such a way to help them get back in and to pave those potholes and to start the process of repair?
Oh boy, that's beautifully stated. I think let me use another metaphor that speaks to what you just were relating. So we know that sleep is a very important component for immune defense and healing. And if we use the same metaphor, I'm going to use the road of life pothole metaphor and how that relates to building resilience. What has been found is that sleep, which is part of our circadian rhythms, as you know, is associated with alteration in a function of one of the glands in our brain called the pineal gland. And the pineal gland secretes an important neurotransmitter hormone called melatonin. And melatonin, which it gets into the blood and influences then the function of the suprachiasmatic nucleus, SCN, which is the sleep master control center for our circadian rhythms. And that then also travels in the blood, that same melatonin, to another gland called the thymus gland, which sits at the base of our neck. And the thymus gland then regulates to a great extent, not totally, but it's one of the influencers of the function of our thymus to stimulate and to poise and to activate our immune system. And so sleep, through this process that I've just described, this network of interfacing, has a very dramatic effect, almost like a drug, on enhancing our immune function. So if you're sleep deprived, sleep disturbed, you're not in rhythm, you then don't have the appropriate circadian balance of things like melatonin and thyroglobulin and thyroid and thymus-related hormone functions. And the downstream effect of that then is to change your immune defense, making the malware more able to have an opportunity to do its dirty business. So that would be an example of, could you say that we're fed on many levels? We think of often being fed in a materialistic way: protein, carbohydrate, fat, vitamins, minerals, accessory nutrients, and so forth. But could we also be fed with things like love, attribution, sleep, peace, joy, kindness? Maybe there are exercise, which sends a signal, activity sends a signal to our immune system. All of these are part of what we consider maybe the food that regulates our immune system. If we extend the view of what food is, fooding meaning essential substance to power up our body to perform at high level function. So that would be my kind of feedback to your thought about looking in a broader way as to how we feed the immune system.
Yeah, that's so beautifully stated. Absolutely. We're hearing so much research about sleep, and you just brought in the thymus, which is one of the main regulators of the immune system and creates cells. One of the organs, or at least the systems, that I'm not hearing a lot about, but if I think of the location of the immune system in the body, one of the key places is the bone. Our skeleton has bone marrow in which we get the progenitor cells to create a number of the different immune cells. So when I hear you say physical activity, and just like there's a lot of research on sleep and immunity, there's also a large body of evidence to suggest that physical activity, if it's not excessive, can lead to bolstering the immune system. I'm curious to get your thought on the crosstalk between bone, the skeleton, physical activity, and the immune system, because I don't hear a lot of people talking about bone health as it relates to immunity.
Oh, you are now we're really having fun. This is a great jump off. So a number of years ago, and I'd have to give us some credit to this, back in the mid 2000s. And when I say us, I mean you and I, when we were working together, and Jack Kornberg and Bob Lehrman and Joe Lamb and all, Matt Tripp. We had been exploring the important role that the bone has in signaling to the rest of the body. And what we came to recognize, and it was being discovered at that time, is that the bone could become fat. You can have fatty bone. Now, why is that kind of interesting when we start thinking about COVID today? Because it turns out that if you looked at the most recent publications of covariable risk factors for serious outcome from COVID, meaning people who go to the hospital and don't do well, age is number one, but second after that, after age, is obesity. Obesity is more a risk factor than is diabetes, than is hypertension, or maleness, being a male. And so you might say, well, why obesity? What's that got to do with a viral infection? I don't even understand how that could be connected. It's because obesity is a state function of metabolism that's associated with this called sterile inflammation, in which your immune system is on edge. It is activated. Most people who are elevated in their BMIs and have excess percent body fat have what I call angry fat. Angry fat is not the kind of fat we see with Santa Claus as ho, ho, ho friendly fat. It's the angry fat that produces a series of inflammatory mediators that modulate and alter our immune system and put our immune system on edge. And so if you have an immune system on edge and now you get a viral infection, now you get kind of a double barrel whammy. And that can throw the immune system out of whack. And what it can do is can trigger one of the most severe things that we know occurs with COVID that really relates to the most serious outcomes, which is called cytokine storms. What are cytokine storms? That's where the immune system just runs out of control and overruns itself and produces all these reactive substances, these mediators, to try to fight back, but the collateral damage to our body can kill us. It's like an immune system unleashed. And when that occurs, that is not good. And that is one of the major causes of rapid death in COVID-19 victims. And that can be precipitated, or at least amplified, when your body has an unrest in your immune system. It's already poised to unleash itself and produce too many of these mediators that are associated with inflammation. So when I look at this construct that you're describing and talk about the bone, and the bone can become fatty as your biomass, or as your overall percent body fat goes up, your BMI goes up, then what we start looking at is metabolic changes that change the network of our biology in such a way to make us more susceptible to the malware taking over and activating our immune system, a superordinate response that causes, in the extreme case, causes death. So again, is that modifiable? Well, the answer is yes, your body mass index is modifiable. As you change your body fat percentage, you also change your percentage fat in your bone. Those are the same adipocytes that get in your bone are the adipocytes you have around the midsection that are associated with inflammation. So this is kind of another part of this emerging story, I think, that's quite interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And as you spoke to the adipose tissue, then I think about lean muscle mass. I think about muscle, sarcopenia, inflammation of the body in that way, looking at, again, the musculoskeletal system, which I don't think is getting enough play, but we do know that muscle is one of the largest insulin responsive organs of the body. And so when we start to create inflammation at system-wide, and then having this in bone, making more osteoclasts than osteoblasts, we get this whole panoply of different systemic-wide inflammatory effects.
Yeah, and you know, we can take that down to a fairly simple takeaway. Just, I think it was 2 weeks ago, in the Journal of American Medical Association, a paper was published that was a study evaluating the effect that number of steps you take per day and what relationship it had to overall outcome of all-cause mortality and various health diseases, basically. And it was quite a stunning conclusion of the study. It was a very well done study, large in scope and statistically significant. And what it found is that there's a graded relationship between the number of steps you take each day, which is a simple measure of fitness, and the ultimate risk you have to all sorts of diseases and ultimate premature death. And so when you start asking, well, does that mean you have to like train for marathons? They actually found that the intensity of the steps was not as important as the number of steps. And it wasn't just like the magic number, you had to get to 10,000 to get a value. It was a graded number of steps. So anything you did was going to be infinitely better than zero. And it got progressively better the more steps that you took over the course of the day. And it didn't have to be steps that were so taxing that you felt like, well, I don't want to do that anymore. That's really uncomfortable. So there's something about the nature of activity that sends a signal to our immune system that is associated then with overall reduction of risk to all diseases. So these are all kind of like sophisticated learnings of simple things. This is complexity, isn't it?
Yeah, it surely is. How interesting. And as you've said before, if you don't measure it, you won't change it. That's always
right.
rung true. You know, one of the other things that you've taught me is about grip strength and how grip strength is a functional marker. And again, what you have really brought to the forefront for so many practitioners is how do we bring back function? How do we get walking again? How do we get strength again? You know, grip strength, and how that is a marker of many different connections into chronic diseases. Did you want to say something about that as being a functional marker overall?
Yeah, thank you. That's another kind of one of those sleeping giant concepts, I think. I read this article about a year ago, maybe it's a little over a year ago, when they were talking about grip strength as a very strongly associated with how older age people pay attention to the literature. And if you do that, you find out that there are literally many papers, I'm going to say tens of papers, in the really good literature evaluating grip strength and looking at it as a surrogate marker for things like mitochondrial bioenergetics, our energy producing machinery. So it's not just the strength of our hand alone, it has to do with all of the things that go into powering up our muscles that requires ATP and metabolic function. So that was a very interesting kind of like, well, let me see if that's true. Let me start doing grip strength on people, because these grip strength measuring devices are very inexpensive. You can get them for less than $20, and just see if I could do any rough kind of correlation. And sure enough, yes, there is some connection between age. Generally, older age people don't have the same grip strength as younger age people, but within any one age, even young people, there's a huge variation in grip strength. And it ties together with other things like, and here's where we get interesting, like their waist to hip measurement, like their heart rate variability, like their sleep cycles, like their blood pressure, things that we can measure fairly simply in individuals that are co-variables that reflect the physical metabolic function of the individual that puts them at risk to all sorts of things if they are not tuned up. So often some of the most simple devices or tools that we can measure in ourselves become great guides and internal coaches about how we can ultimately improve our immune system.
It's so true. Thank you for that explanation. And I bet that that'll be an aha for many nutritionists listening, because yes, there are so many of these individualized, low cost, low budget items that we can be bringing in as part of the nutrition physical exam to assess people's function, whether cognitive function, physical function, emotional function, mental, as it relates to learning memory. So I think that this is really exciting, because I think what you're reflecting on, and you're really the beacon of light as far as successful aging. What does it mean to move into our later decades with resilience, with robustness, with flexibility? And I feel like you are so the embodiment of being very physically active, being mentally active. I mean, you really are a way shower in that way. And if I think of what makes people, why are some people more susceptible to COVID-19 and then not others? You know, what is setting the stage? What is that milieu? It really, I do think it comes back to function, making sure that we stay functional in many different areas of our life through all of our decades.
Yeah, let me give you an example that was really kind of shocking for me that I think supports what you've just said. So we all know that people of color, when they get COVID, seem to have a much poorer outcome than those that are not. we also know that men tend to have a poorer trajectory than women on average. And so when I started to ask, why, there often people will say things like, well, it's in your genes. Or for women, they have better hormones. They have estrogen, which is an immunoprotection hormone, which, by the way, is true, that estradiol is an immunoprotection hormone. So that is true. However, and here's where I had my aha, I went and I looked at mean average life expectancies in different countries, the difference between men and women. So in the United States, women live on average, according to the statistics I found, about 6.7 years longer than men. In Britain, women live about 10.4 years longer, I think. In Russia, women live 12 years longer than men. Okay, so now we're saying, okay, well, women are protected. They must have these better hormones. I don't know exactly why these different cultures vary from men to women. But now let's look at Bangladesh and India, where women live shorter than men. So if it's solely a hormonal factor, why would women in those countries have a shorter life expectancy? We can come up with all sorts of hypotheses, can't we? But what we do know for sure is that smoking shortens one's life expectancy. And men smoke more than women in those countries where you have increased women's longevity. Alcohol excess also is well known by epigenetic influences inflammation positively and creates lowered life expectancy. That's true as well. Men in Russia have much higher alcohol consumption than women. Similarly with smoking, it's something like 6 to 1 men to women. So then we get down to say, well, how about in India and Bangladesh and these other countries? There, the work of women and the stress of women and the time insufficiency of women and the child rearing of women and childbearing and the nutritional status of women. Now we start to look at other social modifiable factors which play on the genes to completely wash out the immune protection they might have had due to estrogen. So these are the big issues for me when I look at it. These are the modifiable factors that we're just not paying enough attention to.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. What a great way to look at patterns of different countries and those influences. So what I'm really taking away from this discussion with you is that we really need to look at patterns. We need to look at the intricacy of how these modifiable lifestyle factors play into each of our lives in that road of life, because they can all be very different and they're all very relevant, whether it's sleep or whether it's physical activity or whether it's food. And oftentimes we see a ripple effect of just one of those into other of those categories. And so what I think you're saying too is that it's not just about being a man or a woman. It's not just about your age. It's really about how you interact with these personalized lifestyle factors. And that's really where the gold is. That is where the locus of control and the seat of empowerment sits.
Yeah, thank you. Yesterday when I was closing out a webcast that we did, I shared a little metaphor, which I will summarize because I got a lot of feedback today from that. I had tens of emails, people saying they really appreciated that I shared the story. I thought it was maybe a little bit too personal, but I think people can relate to it. So as I got up yesterday morning to give this webinar, and the sun was coming up, and I do my normal walk with our dog, Nutmeg, who's a golden retriever, and then we came back, and I always try to spend a half an hour to an hour kind of reading just thought before the days begin, just to kind of prime the pump, so to speak. So we were sitting there looking out at the backyard, and I was thinking about all the trauma and the stress and the things that are going on and the turbulence of our times and the people whose lives have been so severely affected. And I looked out at my dog Nutmeg, and she was lying there looking out at our backyard we're slightly higher than the yard, so she had this vantage point. And when I looked down to her, at her, I saw she was in total bliss. And I thought, now just a minute, we're both in the same reality this moment, right? We're sitting in the same place at the same time. And here I am. I'm admittedly worked up. And here she is in her reality, in which for her, it's the best time of her life. She now has her family around 24/7 because we're sheltered at home. She gets fed, she gets petted, she's walking herself with me like exercise maniac. And she's getting so much love that she'll probably have no fur by the end of this because she gets petted so much. And so for her, it's like, this is the best it can be. Mm-hmm. So then I thought to myself, well, what can I take away from her? What I can take away is that your reality is a frame of reference from which you operate with your day. And it is true that all these things are going on. But the only way that we can really develop a response to them that takes them and makes them into some kind of a life principle that provides purpose is to say, it is so magnificent to have this reality at the moment that I can do something. I can be present. I can be thoughtful. I can be appreciative. And I can have the joy of this moment. And I think if we could infect that concept, as I was learning from my dog, on lots of other people, it would help us through these difficult times.
That is a beautiful story, a beautiful metaphor. And I so concur with you that we have so much to learn in this moment of being at home with our families, with our pets, being in nature. I do think it gives us another frame of reference that we might not have otherwise had, especially somebody like you, where most of your life you've been traveling. You have millions of miles on various airplanes. And so here you are stationed at home, and your dog is loving it. Your family is loving it. And so I think, again, it speaks to where do we put our energy? Where do we put our focus? Is it on the virus or is it on our immune system? Do we put the focus on the fact that we can't do certain things, or that we can do certain things and that we have the ability to be at home? So, Dr.
So I had an email that so reinforces what you're saying, Dr. Minich, from a CEO that is of a company in our industry, a very successful company, and he's a very successful leader of that company. And when he received that message that I was just describing, that metaphor about the dog, he wrote me. I thought it was very sweet. He wrote me and he said, "So I want you to know how that hit me this morning, because I'm a guy who has to travel every week to my place of work, and I leave my wife, and I spend most of my time away, and then I'm going to meetings and so forth and so on. And so now I have found myself with my best friend, who happens to be my wife, on a 24/7 basis." And he said, "It has given me life, and it's given me the energy to better be able to serve and help others. I think I'm now a better leader. I think I'm a better person, and I'm eating better, I'm thinking better, and I'm healthier. And therefore, maybe what I needed is the same thing that you are experiencing with your dog, to reset reality." So I think we can all learn every day about ourselves and how we interface with our opportunity to be alive.
Thank you. Again, that really circles us back to the inspirational tone that you take with all of this information. Really appreciative to have this time with you, Dr. Bland. This has been quite a gift. I know that you've been doing a number of interviews, a number of seminars, and getting the information out. And I always like how we leave on a note of hope. We leave on this note of knowing that we have the ability to alter our reality and alter our perception into the situation. So thank you so much for taking the time to be part of this Thought Leader series.
Thank you so much. And the advocacy and the leadership you're providing is extraordinarily important. I really honor what you're doing. Thank you.
I've had some great teachers like you.
Thank you.
And with that, I will close us for today. I just want to say a couple of words about the American Nutrition Association, of which Dr. Bland is a part of. The ANA is a professional home for the science and the practice of personalized nutrition. If you're enjoying this interview series, you can find all of the recordings on their website and get more great content by becoming a member of the ANA. And you can learn more at theana.org. So I hope you'll look at the website, become a member. We've got so many different resources and a great position paper on there. So thanks again, Dr. Bland, and I'm sure I'll be talking with you soon.
Thank you. Be well. Be safe. Thank you.